Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and today I'm going to give the war in Ukraine a rest and talk about China's good neighbor policy, or what I think is their good neighbor policy in the Pacific Islands and how it's impacting the U.S. So this is all coming out of the news, right? Trouble in Tarawa. And Tarawa Atoll, which is famous from World War II, is actually part of the nation of Kiribati. And about half the 119,000 people in Kiribati live on the atoll, and their president recently pulled his country out of the U.S.-led, the U.S.-Australian, kind of the Western-focused Pacific Island Forum. And so there's been a lot of discussion of, okay, is China behind the move? And they've been making progress in gaining influence in the Solomon Islands. And so there's this concern that China is somehow, corrupting, or, it's always seen as being very nefarious. But I look at this and I go, nefarious or not, the question is, well, why wouldn't one of these nations align with China, right? From the U.S. point of view, we see China as increasingly an enemy. Other folks may not. And so why not align with China? When we look at Kiribati, they have, their main resource is they're a chain of atolls. Not a lot of people live there, not a lot of dry land, but a lot of ocean. They have an economic exclusion zone that is very large and is a very valuable fishing resource. And China, China's got 1 billion people. They got more than that. They got a lot of people to feed. And they're closer to, so it seems a very natural thing, right? That China's going to be very interested in that resource, getting access to it. And from Kiribati's point of view, you have this economic exclusion zone, right? I could really make a very strong argument that, hey, I'd make a deal with China. I'd say, I'd even think about giving them exclusive rights to it and then let them keep other people out of it. Right? You could make some money off of these guys. And so there's a deal to be struck. So massive material interest here for Kiribati. The other thing is, okay, let's talk about security, right? China has no history of aggression in the region. The Japanese occupied Tarawa. The United States invaded the hell out of it. And China, no, right? China, sure. China threatens Taiwan, but Taiwan has traditionally been part of China. Hell, Taiwan claimed to be China, right? So it's a different situation. Also, they're a long way away, right? Just they have good, defense, probably not a huge concern. And oh, by the way, they can free ride. Kiribati can free ride on the security arrangements of the Quad Alliance that's developing, right? They're out there amongst all these other Pacific Islands. If China starts being aggressive, it'll be in those folks' interest to come to their aid, to stop it, and to deter China from doing things. So really, Kiribati is in a situation of, well, why not defect from this forum? Why, we can just free ride off. You guys have a Cold War brewing here, and we are going to play both sides. Why not, right, would be my point on this. And if you're the leader of this country, this should be something you think about. Another thing about China, it tends to promote absolute sovereignty. As China is coming into the world stage, they are very much promoting a view that, well, what goes on in a country is that country's interest. And they're really against things, like worrying about the human rights in a country, worrying about, domestic affairs. Domestic affairs of a country are that country's problem. Obviously, China does not want people messing with it, but it is taking that view, and that is what it brings as a ideological point of view to the world stage, a new policy perspective. And for a lot of small nations, that may be very appealing. And if not in general, like if you still want to have a responsibility to protect, if you still want to promote this greater role for the international norms and organizations, fine. In dealing with China, you're dealing with a nation that is kind of locked, is on the records as being just a sovereignty monger, right? It's the way I see them. And hey, that's not a bad way to, that's not bad for Kiribati when they deal with these folks. Finally, yes, China is an authoritarian regime. The United States and India and Australia and all the other people that we might want to talk about are democracies, and democracy is good and righteous and wholesome. However, democracies are not necessarily great partners to deal with, right? They have pesky issues. They have a tendency to care about certain issues that their public cares about, and your relationship with a democracy can go sour on a disagreement, right? If the population of the other nation doesn't like something that your population likes, you have a problem, right? If you're one democracy dealing with another, your people want you to achieve, if you're the leader, your people want you to achieve certain things, protect their interests. And other people may, in the other democracy, the population will want their leader to do that. And so it's not for nothing that in selectorate theory, they predict that wars can occur between democracies if you have a weak democracy that is got a point upon which it is being intransigent. It is not willing to acquiesce to a demand. And you have a very powerful democracy that, hey, you can't fight us, right? And Kiribati looks like that kind of, what kind of defense could they put up? And so I don't know why this would happen, but not for nothing, right? Democracies generally don't fight one another, but the exception to that would be big democracies versus little ones, and Kiribati is definitely a little democracy, 119,000 people, right? So that with China, though, with an authoritarian regime, they're going to be far more transactional in their dealings with other nations. The leadership in China is not bound by domestic, internal things. They do have some issues, but it's a much more, unitary thing. You just deal with the leader, right? You make the leader of China happy and you make a deal with them, there aren't going to be pesky problems. And they're not going to care about what you do. I don't know. And there's no reason to think that in Kiribati, they've got anything they're trying to do. But someday they may have an industry that is doing something environmentally that people don't like, or they may have some labor. I don't know what could possibly come up, but they could run afoul of pressure for democracies over some domestic affair that China probably won't care. China will only care about, hey, did you drop out of the Pacific Island Forum like we asked? Yeah, okay. So it's simple to deal. And in fact, Alistair Smith has done a lot of research along and is doing more research along this line. And he makes this argument that all democracies, prefer to deal with authoritarian regimes because they are more transactional, because they're cheaper to buy and thus cheaper to buy off, and it's a lot easier to deal with them. So this is something we have to keep in mind. Sure, we want to make China out to be the big threat, but other people may not see it, and other people may have incentives to actually deal with them. So I mentioned the good neighbor policy, and something about this reminds me of that. In the 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had this good neighbor policy. And he said, look, we're going to respect other people's nations. Basically what they did is he renounced the U.S. pattern of intervention, right? He renounced this tradition of intervention in the region and said, look, we are not going to mess in the domestic affairs of nations. So the U.S. ended its occupation of Haiti, rescinded the Platt Amendment to the treaty with Cuba, which said that the U.S. could intervene in Cuba. And these were, steps that Latin American nations like, well, okay, I don't know. You've got pretty much a history of intervention. But essentially what the U.S. said is, look, you back our foreign policy. You back us in what we are going to do. We are now going to be kind of managing the region on the international stage. And, war was brewing, even though this is way before that, it was like, but, this is FDR could see this was coming down. And he said, look, we are no longer going to be worried about your domestic affairs. We want you to be on our side. And the end product of this is, in some ways, that we just started, supporting dictatorships. But the U.S. kind of took that step back that until Jimmy Carter, we didn't start worrying about what people did. We didn't worry about human rights. We didn't, there was a long period of time where the U.S. was not promoting democracy, was not promoting human rights. And so the good neighbor policy, that's in our past. And so this China, with their Belt Road Initiative and their views towards sovereignty, seems to have a parallel to the good neighbor policy. And in fact, the only thing I can think of that's different is China doesn't have a history of interventionism. This is something, yes, China takes over Tibet. Yes, if you border China and you have some history with those borders moving around, that's a problem for you. But again, for most of the people of the world, China has always had this view of, well, their strategy has been about defending, right? And they defend, and they don't worry about what goes on over there. And so they really don't have this history. So I kind of see, China is kind of by default operating in much the same way the U.S. operated under the good neighbor policy. And so in that parallelism, it's really this question of, hey, what was good for the goose? Well, that's my short rant. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching my short rant. I hope it was short and not too much of a rant. I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and though I teach at Troy University, this video is my own work. Troy University has neither approved nor reviewed the content. So there. And if you want to learn more about Troy anyway, figure out who would hire a guy like this, you can always go to www.troy.edu. I also am going to have a little card popping up here that you can go see my bio and some information about where I teach, which will descend to shameless self-promotion. But I want more students. What can I say? And finally, the music you've been listening to is Tonight at 8 by Shane Ivers. So thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back and enjoy another short rant.